Today we're taking a look at the 7Artisans 50mm t1.05. But first, if you're new to the channel, my name is Anson, and on this channel we talk about filmmaking, specifically filmmaking gear, tutorials, and a look at the projects that I'm working on. And so if that's something you're into, consider subscribing. Now, over the last year or so, 7Artisans have dipped their toes into the cinema lens market. The first line of lenses are deemed their Vision lineup. They are coming up with a Spectrum lineup, which I will be reviewing one of those lenses here in the next week or two, but those will be coming out hopefully later in July. Those will be full frame lenses. The Vision lenses, however, are APS-C or crop sensor lenses. Now, before I dive into my thoughts on this lens, I do want to clarify that 7Artisans has sent this to me to review, but as always, they're not requiring I say anything specifically, and so you get my full and honest opinion. So with that, let's talk about what I think about this lens, and as always, we're going to talk about this lens by the image, the build, and my overall thoughts / who I think will be useful for. And let's start by talking about the image. Now, as I said before, this is an APS-C lens, and so with this being a 50mm t1.05, you're more likely going to get a field of view of about 75mm and an aperture performance of somewhere between t1.5 and t1.6-ish. And so that's something you do want to keep in mind, like I said, right off the bat. And so you're not going to get the full frame performance that you would see normally when you're using full frame lenses on something like the Sigma FP. Now, that being said, I really was pleased with the overall image performance of this lens. Is it perfect? Absolutely not, but this lens does come in around $400 to $450 depending on where you buy it. But that price point is something you do want to keep in mind, because normally with APS-C cinema lenses in this market and with competing companies, you're looking maybe around $500 to $600, and this does come at a little bit less than that. And it does offer a t1.05. At t1.05, it was relatively sharp where you're focusing and on your subject that you're focusing on, and it does have that dreamy bokeh that you normally get at really fast aperture lenses. Now, that in mind, you do have things like chromatic aberration. That should not be a surprise. You'll see some color fringing. I did notice a little bit of focus breathing when you focus with this lens. Again, that's something to expect with these cheaper cinema lenses. So you will have some chromatic aberration, you will have some focus breathing. The thing that really drove me nuts about this lens, and just I really don't like about this lens, is the minimum focusing distance. This really did not have good minimum focusing distance, but that's not really a surprise being a 50mm or maybe a 75mm field of view. You don't normally get really good minimum focusing distance with those focal lengths, and so that's something you do have to keep in mind, is it is not going to have good minimum focusing distance. But otherwise, I was really impressed with the performance, and so like I said before, not the perfect lens, but I really was impressed with what you're getting at this price point. So with that, let's talk about the build of the lens. Now, the build of the lens is actually something I've really been impressed with. It looks to be an all metal housing. You do have standard pitch gears for both your aperture and your focusing ring, and you do have an 82mm filter thread. Now, something that's really cool to have is you do have a 270-degree focus throw, and so that's really nice. Now, I can't say how precise the markings are. I didn't test that specifically, but having that longer focus throw does mean that you do have a little bit more control over your finer focusing points, and so I do like seeing that on this more compact cinema lens. But that's the key point for this lens. It is a small, compact cinema lens, and so using it on the Sigma FP doesn't dwarf the FP like it would if I'm using my Tokina cinema lenses, because those are big lenses. I love those lenses. They perform great, but they're big. And so having a miniature tank, compact cinema lens is a really nice option, maybe for a walk around scenario when you don't want to use autofocus lenses. This might be something to slap on the FP or maybe even the S1H to have a more compact setup, but also have the user experience that you're used to with some of your cinema lenses. So between the image, the build, what are my overall thoughts and who would I recommend this lens to? My overall thoughts is, at this price point, this lens does perform really well. I would buy this lens if you want a compact setup, because this is a really small lens. Yes, you might be using your APS-C mode, but that is something that may be worth the sacrifice if you do want to, again, have the same user experience that you might have with some of your cinema lenses on your full frame Sigma FP. And honestly, the FP does really well in its APS-C mode. A lot of people think it's actually a lot sharper in its APS-C mode than it is in its full frame mode. And so that's something you do want to consider. Now, if you are somebody that's using the Sigma FP or the S1H and you want that full frame coverage, I would maybe wait to check out the Spectrum lenses that are coming out. But that being said, I haven't had my hands on that lens, so I don't know if it's a bigger lens. And so again, if you do want a more light and compact setup with the user experience of a cinema lens, I would absolutely check out the 7Artisans 50mm t1.05. So that's it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy the video, make sure to give it a like. And if you're digging the overall content from the channel, consider subscribing. As always, thank you for joining. Go and find your journey. Go embrace life. Stay safe. Be happy. Support each other. Wash those hands, and I'll see you here next time. Peace.